2001. Mardi Gras celebration. While the streets are packed with people celebrating the occasion, a group of friends is going on a joyride in their convertible. Declan is filming their group's celebration and feeling on top of the world. As he is standing up in the car, shouting in joy, he suddenly sees a ghostly figure appear in the middle of the road. Declan shouts to the driver to stop the car. As the car skids to a stop, the figure comes into focus. For but a second, the visage of a beautiful woman in an old-timey maid uniform is visible before she disappears into thin air as quickly as she appears. Declan gets out of the car and looks around, perplexed, while his friends question what is going on. While looking around, he notices an abandoned mansion on the side of the road. It's covered in fog and darkness and overrun by nature. Declan's friends say the place is called Monet Hall, and it's a very bad juju indeed. It's been inhabited by squatters for almost a century now. Emboldened by alcohol, Declan decides to go in, despite his friends' warnings. He must be seeing the place as the only logical explanation for where the woman may have come from. Reluctantly, they get out of the car and follow him in. As they approach the mansion, Declan decides he wants to buy it, and asks his friend Remy to find out where to send the check. He tries to go in to see the ballroom, but before he can, a strange noise, something between distant howling winds and screaming, starts coming out of the house. A strong wind picks up around Declan, and the windows and doors of the house shutter open. His friends run away, terrified at this sight, but Declan seems unfazed. If anything, he is mesmerized by what is happening, looking on with a smile even as two people appear for a second on the balcony, accompanied by thunder, and disappear again. Even under the influence of substances, it would take someone truly fascinated by the occult to be this undaunted by what is, for all intents and purposes, a scene right out of a horror movie. Remy comes back and tells Declan to get out, or he will have to leave him here. While the thunder, lightning, and wind rage on, and the strange sound, this time more audible as children singing, gets louder, he gives the mansion one more look over and leaves. He does stop for a moment, seemingly feeling a gaze on the back of his head, as another figure looks at him from one of the windows, again blinking in and out of existence. Back in New Orleans, it's a beautiful sunny day 8 years later. A woman walks into a restaurant. The cook asks her to taste the stew he has on the stove. She gives him some tips on what to add to the stew. The cook trusts her palate and agrees, and he lets her know her grandma called for a favor. She gets into her car and takes off. Another woman, standing outside the restaurant, seems to be observing her movements. In the center of the town, the buildings are decorated with plants and flags. There are palm trees, gardens, and horse carriages. Even if some buildings' windows are boarded up due to being shattered by yearly hurricanes, life here seems vibrant and unaffected. As the woman drives away from the center of the town, however, the sights tell a different story. The suburbs appear dilapidated. Houses are covered in overgrown grass, damaged, or boarded up. As she crosses a bridge over a river, civilization continues to break down. Only a few houses can be seen between the trees and bushes, all of which appear severely damaged. Conditions this far away from the town would already be considered unsuitable for living, but she continues to drive even further to get to where her grandmother lives. Grandma's house, in contrast, looks well maintained. While still ramshackle, it is taken care of, with a small garden out in the front and a clean interior. She must be a very independent and self-sufficient person to live this far away by herself and maintain a house in this state. Grandma invites her in and tells her about the favor she called for. It may have taken him time, but Declan went through with his idea to buy the hall and is moving in now. Grandma has called Lena to bring over a welcoming gift, freshly baked cornbread, to try to set her up with Declan. She's reluctant at first, saying he will leave soon like everyone else who bought the hall and that he may not be suitable for her. But Grandma insists, so Lena grabs the cornbread and heads out. When she arrives at the hall, it's clear a lot of work has been put into the place. Far from the rundown mansion it was, the area has been cleared of trash and overgrown wildlife, and returned to how it probably looked 100 years ago. While Declan is unpacking boxes from a car, he notices Lena walking down the driveway. As they catch each other's eyes, he is left speechless. He grabs a box and catches up to her by the doorway, where she's trying to find the owner of the place. Declan decides to play coy, and asks her questions about what she thinks of the owner. She was expecting someone who would sit and drink cocktails while watching people work at his house. A spoiled rich boy who wouldn't get his hands dirty came with unrealistic expectations. As it's been shown by the state of the town, living in New Orleans is more difficult than most people can handle. It's clear there is some chemistry between them. After Declan reveals he is the owner of the house, they laugh at the situation and ask at the same time if they have met before. While they talk about where they may have seen each other, Lena helps one of the men move furniture. The man is Jack, a paralegal at Declan's law firm. He reveals Declan has been spending his money providing legal services to people affected by the storm, as well as a variety of other charitable services. Lena looks intrigued by him. Her assumption of what kind of man the owner of the hall would be was completely wrong. Intent on leaving an impression on Declan, she grabs a can of beer from nearby, chugs it, and tells him she has to leave for work. Their eyes linger on each other as she leaves, both of them seeming pleasantly surprised by their meeting. Lena returns to her grandma's house and asks her what the catch is, suspicious that a man like Declan is single. Reluctantly, she admits Declan was supposed to get married 3 weeks ago and broke off his engagement 2 days before marriage, but she comments that would make him just Lena's type. Before Lena can respond, a phone call interrupts them. It's Lena's mother, whom she immediately assumes is calling to ask for cash or bail. This time her assumption was right, and knowing her grandma wouldn't have the heart to refuse her daughter's request, she left to avoid hearing the conversation. Back at the hall, Declan is walking around the mansion, admiring how good the rooms look, when he gets a phone call from his mom. While their relationship does not appear as strained as Lena's and her mother's, there does appear to be some friction. Their conversation is more akin to a court discussion than a talk between parent and child. She urges him to apologize for his rash decision to break off his wedding and to re-announce the engagement. Declan tries to explain that the reason he broke it off in the first place was because he did not love the woman he was going to be married to. It must have taken a lot of pressure to convince the same man who was shown 8 years ago to be free, careless, and feeling like the king of the world to accept a loveless engagement and marriage. But the hall coming on the market acted like a catalyst for him. He quit his unfulfilling job, broke off the engagement, and bought the house where he had a supernatural experience all those years ago. While trying to explain his perspective to his mother and touring the house, he notices something unusual about one of the rooms. Not only is it fully furnished, but it looks lived in. He hangs up on his mother and calls his realtor to ask about this. The realtor tells him the previous owners sold the place before their furniture even arrived, so nobody has lived there for at least a year. Declan assumes someone has been squatting there. While it is the only logical explanation, it's not very likely that someone who has to resort to squatting, even if they wanted to, would be able to afford to furnish a room with what looks like vintage handmade furniture in very good condition. As if this strange sight were not enough, as soon as he hangs up with the realtor, he hears the sounds of footsteps from above. While going up the stairs to check it out, the sound of a crying baby gets louder and louder. Hearing the sounds of a crying baby, in a house that is supposed to be empty, would make even rational people run out of the house screaming and write it off as haunted. While Declan seems more fascinated by the supernatural happenings than afraid, he is not entirely immune. His hand visibly shakes when opening the door where the sounds are coming from. As soon as the door opens, crying is replaced by the whispering of what seems like hundreds of voices. Even this only seems to deter him for a second at most, but before he can go up to the attic, Remy interrupts him. Declan asks him to go check it out for him, using allergies as an excuse, but when he goes up and looks around, the attic is empty. The friends decide to pop open the bottle of wine Remy brought as a housewarming gift and spend the rest of the day celebrating. He surely has a lot to celebrate, apart from roaming ghosts and crying children around his new house, of course. The strange occurrences at Manet Hall only ramp up at night. Declan is woken up by the sounds of footsteps and 2 women talking. When he steps out of the bedroom, he sees 2 maids walk by, and when he follows them into a room, it looks like he is transported to the past. A maid who looks exactly like Lena, the same maid Declan saw on the road 8 years ago, walks out on the balcony, looking at a handsome man riding a horse. The man's name is Lucian, whom his brother Julian compares to an Olympian who has come down from the heavens to walk around with mortals, with more than a hint of jealousy in his voice. Julian stops the maid from leaving. He believes her admiration for Lucian is because he is the heir to the family fortune, and had he been born 15 minutes earlier, the woman Abigail would be looking at him this way. As she leaves, Julian continues to look on with jealousy. Could this love triangle be the reason why the mansion is haunted? Declan follows Abigail and ends up in front of the same room he heard crying from earlier. The door swings open and reveals a creepy elderly woman dressed in black. He turns around and sees Julian standing in the doorway, holding a bloody knife. Declan tries to run away, but the faces of the elderly woman and Julian keep flashing in front of him. He walks out of the house, sleepwalking from the looks of it, and eventually wakes up somewhere on a bench, in front of one beautiful and peaceful alligator. Even for someone like Declan, who, until now, has expressed fascination with the supernatural occurrences around the hall, this has been a daunting experience. The feeling is only compounded when, the next morning, while he is trying to research sleepwalking, his realtor shows up to inquire about the room that the supposed squatter was in. The room is completely empty now. Declan assumes they must have moved the furniture out during the night and asks for all locks in the house to be changed. He leaves confused, and as he does, the vintage furniture in the room begins to shimmer back into existence. While on their way to Lena's bar, Remy and his girlfriend give Declan a rundown of the hall's history. The maid, Abigail, did end up marrying Lucian, which his mother disapproved of. Abigail then supposedly abandoned her husband and child to run off with a different man from the bayou. Shortly after, Lucian murdered his brother in a knife brawl and drowned him in the bayou. The child was raised by Abigail's family, and Lena is a direct descendant of her. After embracing the couple, the girl greets the mansion owner himself. Two groups are created then, the girls and the boys, and within both groups, conversation arises about the future relationship. Lena wants to know more about Declan, and Declan just wants to share his feelings with his best friend. As it turns out, there is a wonderful matching pattern in both lives. Declan has abandoned many throughout his time, and Lena has been abandoned many times. Not the best precondition for a healthy long-term relationship, maybe. Still, there is an attempt at conversation and some help with the plates that leads to quite a bit of frustration. A plan is made to enjoy beers and talk their relationship over. The hands are shaken, and an abrupt, electric, and irresistible feeling is sparked in both hearts. For a brief moment of touch, Lena and Declan feel like they are Abigail and Lucian. That night, Declan's peaceful supper is interrupted by strange noises again. Climbing up the stairs, he finds himself in front of yet another memory. This time, Lucian and Abigail are talking about their mutual love for poetry when the mother of the house is first introduced. Strict, coarse, and rude, she catches a glimpse of a strong connection between her son and the maid and takes it upon herself to unroot this connection immediately. Returning to Declan, a door opens all on its own, but before the man can enter, it closes again. The sight of what's inside is simply too difficult to handle for the main character. He prefers to step back and enjoy the rest of his night in peace. The next morning, after sharing his troubles with his friends, Declan receives unusual advice from both. As they say, instead of visiting a physician, he should visit Lena's grandmother, Odette Simone. She will know what to do with Declan's hallucinations. Strangely enough, Declan decides to follow this advice. Odette hosts him with huge warmth and smiles. The woman invites him inside for dinner and fills him with bright smiles and good intentions. After the small talk, she starts talking about her daughter and gives him a few pieces of advice about how to ask her out on a date. Only then does she jump to the main subject of their conversation. It seems very unusual, but she seems to know about the troubles Declan is having with the former residents of the hall. Grabbing his reluctant and realistic hands, she reads his fate out loud and spells out the bizarre story like a strange voodoo magician. Declan is tightly bound to the fates of Lucian and Abigail. The story that wasn't finished is circling round and round, seeking a right ending, and it is Declan's task to make it right this time. His ancestors will never leave him alone until he listens to their story, especially the parts he doesn't want to hear, and cuts through this unending cycle of struggle and torment. The time at the mansion was stopped a long time ago, and at some point, it must have ticked on. As expected, the young man is weirded out and afraid of her unnatural mode of speech. Affected by this ominous situation, he finds himself fleeing Mrs. Simone's place. All he wanted was to create a legal clinic to help people. Perhaps he should have used a place that was not haunted by ghosts for that holy objective. In the next scene, Declan finds the formal will of Lucian's mother, by which she left everything she owned to her youngest son, Julian. He and Remy are discussing the importance of this letter when Effie comes in, frustrated and desperate. She made millions of calls, but there was still no church available for their marriage. As it happens, however, one of their best friends is the owner of a certain mansion. Of course, it will be available for the occasion. After this matter is taken care of, Declan unveils his motorcycle and decides to follow Mrs. Simone's advice about asking Lena out. Riding up to her, he simply states that they are going on a date, and he doesn't take no for an answer. Charmingly, Lena changes her attire, brings her up to a more official appearance, and wraps her arms around his waist. After the refreshing ride, the two feel as close as ever, but the burning connection that fate has given them will soon become more apparent. Entering the hall, Lena finds herself in front of a well-laid-out table. Everything is perfect and peaceful, and there is a bright smile on Declan's face until he catches a glimpse of Lena's pocket watch, and something clicks inside his heart. It is the same kind of electric, irresistible feeling that fogs his entire mind and changes his expression abruptly. As Lena says, it once belonged to her grandma's grandma, and it hasn't worked in a very long time. Not a single jeweler in the state can get it to work. Mrs. Simone's words reappear in Declan's mind all over again. The subject of ghosts creeps up in their conversation then, but it fails to destroy the overall tone of the occasion. The date still ends up being great. After eating and drinking, the duo gets comfortable on the floor. There, after discussing the different versions of the Abigail and Lucian stories, the mother who left her child is mentioned. As we know, Lena has been abandoned by her mother as well. The moment becomes heavier immediately, but Declan lifts up this weight with a single gentle touch. Lena wants her life to be filled with such touches. She wants this feeling to never end, and she wants to kiss the man who caused it. But unfortunately, this man is haunted by strange hallucinations again. This time, he hears the crying of a child and runs upstairs to enter the room from which the noise is coming from. Before he can do that, however, he loses consciousness and finds himself in a bleak abyss. Neither the abyss nor the fainting can stand in the way of their intimacy tonight, though. Once Declan comes back to his senses, he stands up for some coffee, wiggles on his feet a little bit, and looks over at Lena as if he were seeing her for the first time. They get intertwined with one another then, and the ancient bond between their souls is stimulated once more. Once it is all over, two figures are shown standing above them, looking over the couple, and speaking in an ominous voice. The story that was once cut short will surely be finished this time. The next morning, Declan wakes up alone, while Lena speaks about him with her best friend. Both girls seem excited to discuss the possibility of this relationship becoming something extremely meaningful, when suddenly, an employee tells Lena that she has a visitor. Walking over to the office, the girl realizes that the visitor is the person whom she least wanted and most expected. It is her mother, miserable and a beggar of mercy. She wants her daughter to accept her back, to take care of her, and to dedicate her life to her. She will be a good girl this time, she promises, and her words are so pitiful that for a moment, cracks start forming in Lena's stony heart. Walking over to her, she places her hand over the mother's shoulder. Perhaps she will even accept her with open arms, but very soon, something is said that gets everything back to normal. The mother reminds Lena of her ancestral curse, the spell that has been haunting the women of this line for a very long time. If she doesn't live with her partner, then she will surely be the one left behind. There is no other way. Somebody will inevitably walk away. Bitter and resentful, the mother takes some money off of her daughter and walks out of the restaurant. Declan smiles and offers for the afternoon are the first thing Lena experiences afterward. Unfortunately, after the reappearance of the curse, Lena isn't really in the mood for any kind of advancement in her relationship with Declan. She is walking away. Naturally, Declan is extremely confused, and of course he goes to Odette to clear things up. The visit definitely won't cause any more questions this time. Starting with the lowest, most ominous tone, the woman gets her family photo album and shows some pictures from it to Declan. The poor young man was only looking for some relationship advice, but what he gets in this moment instead are pictures of the people he's been seeing in hallucinations and fever dreams. To add to everything, he hears the music of a gramophone when he gets back to his mansion. Coming seemingly from the floor, the noise is like a distant call from the past, an intruder agent of the lost memories. The crying of a kid mixes with the sound of the gramophone, and looking up, the young man suddenly notices his chandelier, moving back and forth. Cracks appear in the face of reality, and the chandelier comes crashing down on the floor in seconds. Something is definitely willing to harm Declan at any cost. In the next scene, Lena visits her grandmother at her house. As expected, Odette has a radically different opinion about Lena's dating life. She knows what the girl thinks about walking away, and in this moment she tries her best to make her reconsider her unhelpful beliefs. Perhaps she will even be successful in this endeavor. So far, even though Lena is resisting strongly, Odette is doing pretty well. Meanwhile, Declan is cleaning his yard for the upcoming ceremony when, suddenly, he notices a beautiful red rose in the notches of the overgrown thorns. A sudden tide of memory crashes into him then, and in a blink of an eye, he finds himself in front of yet another memory, starring Lucian and pregnant Abigail. In this memory, Abigail is expressing her concerns about Julian and the mother of the house. Unfortunately, none of these concerns are validated by Lucian. He believes that Abigail is interpreting the situation incorrectly. When Declan comes back to reality, he is helped to his feet by none other than Odette and Lena. The two women are dedicated to knowing what he is seeing in the hallucination, and bit by bit, once the story is unveiled in front of their eyes, Odette starts working her charms. As expected, she assumes that Declan is Lucian's reincarnation, but the young man from Boston naturally sets out to reject this idea at all costs. Unfortunately for him, however, it all starts making sense once he accepts the possibility of reincarnation. Even worse, it makes perfect sense when you think that Declan is a reincarnation of Abigail and not Lucian. Throughout this whole time, the young man has been seeing the memories from her perspective, and the house has been extremely hostile towards him. Before coming here, all Declan wanted was to become the honorable owner of a legal clinic. But instead, he has become the reincarnation of a housemaid. What an enormous advancement. Surprisingly enough, Declan is the one who believes in this, while Lena keeps rejecting this idea on the surface. Upon entering the house, she suddenly starts seeing things too. The vision of Lucian crosses the room in front of her eyes and sets out onto the stairs coming up into the attic. Attracted by the sound of his crying baby, he finds her crying in a crib and starts looking for Abigail. The farewell letter is soon found, and the harsh reality crashes into the young man in full force. When the mother finds him shaking with Marie-Anne still in his hands, the woman starts showing fake affection. Pretending to be surprised, she reveals something extremely hurtful to her son, as she says, Abigail has been seeing a red-headed boy from the bayou for a long time. She has been cheating on him, and most likely, she's with the red-headed boy at this moment as well. This memory hits hard, but the memory that comes next is even worse. There, Julian insults Abigail in front of Lucian. The cunning brother uses all his dark prowess to set flames on his brother's broken heart. He even goes as far as to reveal that he knows about a heart-shaped birthmark on Abigail's thigh. The fact that he has seen it indicates that she has been intimate with him. As expected, Lucian loses his mind after this. Inserting a knife in his brother's stomach, he murders him on the spot. Lena can feel the blood on her hands after the hallucination. There is no question about it now. She is Lucian's reincarnation. Running to her grandmother's house, she looks to clear her mind and calm down, but instead, she is present with her mother, standing in the doorway. All the descendants of the past story are now gathered together under one roof. If all of them are reincarnations, then there is no question that Lena's mother was once Julian, the cunning disease of a human being. Naturally, Lena has no intention of staying here. Once she storms out, Declan runs after her. He wants her to stay. He loves her, and he knows that they were brought together for a reason. To make the story right this time, he has already accepted the truth, but the same cannot be said about Lena. Driving away, she endeavors to run away from her fate, and there is nothing Declan can do about it at this moment. In the next scene, Ms. Simone and Declan meet each other face to face for the first time. All alone in the mansion, the woman asks him for money and starts out by presenting herself as a pitiful, beat-up woman who wants to get better. Naturally, Declan cannot be deceived this easily, so the woman is forced to change her ways. In the blink of an eye, some evil force shines from her eyes as she starts spitting threats. But again, Declan won't be intimidated either. He's been a lawyer for a long time. This is a piece of cake for him. That night, when the young man is picked up by his friends to go to the bachelor's party, Miss Simone sneaks inside the house. Roaming through the dark rooms, she collects some money and jewelry. But suddenly she is met with the most hostile and evil dwellers of this mansion. Together, their joint power will surely be worth taking into consideration. That night, when Declan brings drunk Remy back to the bayou, he walks up the stairs and is met with the malice of the memory. Miss Simone pushes him off the stairs, and the young man goes rolling down to the first floor. He's okay in the end. The evil in the house must do better if it wants to really hurt him. When Lena finds out about this, she rushes to the bayou with Effie. The news is so striking that even the possibility of postponing the wedding is discussed, but this is not something Declan will allow. The party is on, and it doesn't matter if the evil spirits roam the mansion. They'll just make sure nobody tries to climb any stairs tomorrow, and they should be fine. The ceremony goes perfectly, but for Declan, the same cannot be said about the party. Dancing together with his love, the memories Lena has seen are revealed to him. The girl has a completely different perspective on the story, so there is no wonder her thoughts about it are different. As she says, Abigail was cheating on Lucian with Julian and some boys from the bayou. She left her child and husband, and took everything other than the watch, which had no meaning to her. This story is an endless wheel that can only lead to disappointment and bloodshed, and she and Declan were just attracted to it by fate. If they were brought together for a reason, then this reason is to somehow stop this wheel from turning. This is why she has decided to sell her place here and move out of this city for good. When the dance is over and Lena walks away from Declan, the young man hears the crying noise coming from the attic once more. Walking upstairs, he sees Abigail feeding her baby. While driving away from the bayou, Lena is forced to stop her car because the tide of memories is coming to her as well. The Christmas party is roaring downstairs when Julian appears in the attic with Abigail and her child. With a predatory look, he moves slowly and speaks in a crackling, ominous voice. Jealousy is felt towards his brother. The crooked, sickly love he's been feeling for Abigail and the irresistible, enormous, and intangible flow of human resentment are pouring from every pore of his body as he makes his way towards the girl. It is readily apparent what he is about to do. While people have fun downstairs, nobody can hear Abigail screaming and the child's crying. Julian's mind is completely taken over by madness when he finally gets what he wants. Taken prisoner by his own hate, he feels the screaming of the woman and the child burning his skin, and to make it stop, he suffocates Abigail. It is not long after that his mother comes upstairs to check on what is happening. As was expected, she is the one coming up with the plan to hide it all away. When the memory is over, Declan, the reincarnation of Abigail, finds himself standing in the attic with the reincarnation of Julian. The party roars downstairs, and the usual end of this story is coming near. Ms. Simone is hitting Declan repeatedly when Lena finally appears in the main hall. Setting foot on the stairs, she sees Lucian's mother coming down and calling him to dance. The woman is trying her best to win some time for Julian to hide away the corpse, but this time, it won't work. This time, Lena resists. Running into the attic, she gets her mother away from Declan, and as the knife gets into action, we are reminded of how the story ends between Lucian and Julian. This time, however, there will be no blood spilled. As the knife is dropped on the attic floor, Ms. Simone comes to her senses abruptly. As it seems, she's been possessed all this time, but now the soul of Julian is out of her system for good. In the final scene, the couple is walking across the front yard, speaking about the future of their relationship, when suddenly they notice the clock starting to tick again. In one moment, it all comes together, and the truth of the real love that was once felt in this mansion is played out in front of their eyes. The same love is clearly flowing between Lena and Declan at this moment, and thankfully, we all have reason to believe that this time they will make it right.